Good evening, everybody. I want to first apologize for being late. I had a call coming from work that I had to fix something. Okay, let's look at Midrash. Where do I start from? It is well known to those familiar with rabbinic writings that in general, the rabbis wrote in a style which was never meant to be taken literally. The rabbis wrote in a style. Anybody who have studied Midrash, anybody who has studied the Talmud, etc., the Zohar, the rabbis wrote in a style which was never meant to be taken literally. Dr. Brown, in his work, Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, states, Talmudic citations are not meant to be precise interpretations of the biblical text, but are often based on free association and word play. I agree here with Dr. Brown, 101%. I'll read what he states again. I don't agree with him that much, but this one I do. Talmudic citations are not meant to be precise interpretations of the biblical text, but are often based on free association and word plays. It means that one should not form the habit of misusing and distorting Talmudic citations. So one should not form the habit of misusing and distorting them. Most take the words of the rabbis in the Talmud and Midrash in its most literal meaning, even when it is obvious that it is not meant that way. In Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah, Rambam, he discusses the traditional Jewish view of the Midrash. In the introduction to the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin, he discusses three classes of people and how they look at the Agados. This is the name used for Talmudic Midrashic teachings. Rambam uses languages I don't want to use here, so I will list all three and then focus on the third one. You can pause when I upload it on the website. You can pause it and read through 1 and 2. I want to focus on the third one. The third group, Rambam says, is those who understand that the words of the sages are very deep and not what they seem to be. These are the truly wise men who are knowledgeable in the words of the sages. So according to the Rambam, these are the ones who truly understand the words of our sages. He talks about number one, those who only think that there is the simple meaning. And then he talks about number two, who he claims are like number one, who don't have the capabilities to come to the true meanings. But the number three is my focus. Those who understand that the words of the sages are very deep and not what they seem to be. Rambam says these are the truly wise men who are knowledgeable in the words of the sages. And according to him, These are the ones who truly understand the words of our sages. That is what Rambam says, and I'm quoting him. You see, not all Midrashim are the same, nor do they all follow the same style or methods. Even the different works of Midrashic material follow different methods. So let me give you a taste of Midrash to explain how the genre works. Leviticus 11 states this from the Tanak. But these you shall not eat among those that bring up the cud, and those that have a cloven hoof. The camel, because it brings up its cud, but does not have a completely cloven hoof, it is unclean for you. And the hare, because it brings up its cud, but will not have a completely cloven hoof, it is unclean for you. Sorry, I think that's the badger, and the badger, number 5. Number 6, and the hare, because it brings up its cud, but does not have a completely cloven hoof, it is unclean for you. And the pig, because it has a cloven hoof that is completely split, but will not regurgitate its cud, it is unclean for you. So we see that 4 animals are mentioned. We have the camel, we have the hare, and we have the badger. The text is telling us that these 3, they chew their cud, but they don't have split hoofs. And they are unclean, meaning they are unclean. Then we have the pig. What are we told about the pig? The pig has split hoofs, but does not chew its cud. It stands different. It is also unclean. Now, the rabbis tell us that the word for cud in the Hebrew is similar to the word for, or to the phrase to follow after. Put that in your spirit. The word for cud, the rabbis tell us, is similar to follow after. So when we come to Leviticus Rabbah 13:5, this is what the Midrash states. The camel is Babylon. The hare is Greece. The badger is Media. The pig is Edom. It's fascinating. I mean, where are you getting this from? The interpretation is based on Leviticus 11:4-7, as we just read, dealing with the 4 types of animals forbidden to eat: the camel, the hare, the badger, the pig. And in its midrashic interpretation, we are told that the camel is Babylon, the hare is Greece, the badger is Media, the pig is Edom. Why is this? What is the explanation we are given for that? Well, the Midrash tells us the camel is Babylon because it chews its cud. It means another kingdom will follow it. The hare is Greece because it chews its cud. It means another kingdom will follow it. The badger is Media because it chews its cud. It means another kingdom will follow it. The pig is Edom because it doesn't chew its cud, because there will be no other kingdom after it. This is the explanation of what they are saying that these animals are. Okay, now they go further, explaining Why is the pig called in Hebrew Hazor? Because it will return, they explain, the crown to its master, as it says, and they quote Obadiah 1. And saviors shall ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau, and the Lord shall have the kingdom. This is all gotten from a verse that is talking about unclean animals, those that chew their cud, those that don't, those that have split hooves, those that don't. So how can you pull such a midrash from a clear text that has to do with dietary laws? Well, that is not the question we're supposed to be asking, because this is midrash. What we are supposed to be asking is, what is this midrash teaching us? To answer those questions, we should begin with these questions. What we should ask is the theological point that the midrash is making, is it true? And then the second one is it telling us what the simple meaning of the verse really is? Two questions. Is the theological point the midrash is making, is it true? Remember, theological point that the midrash is making, is it true? Number two, is the midrash telling us what the simple meaning of the verse really is? According to Obadiah, the prophet, the kingdom of Edom is to be the last, and after it falls, the rulership will return to Yah and his people, the Hebrews. So we see that they have spoken truly and in agreement to what is said in the Tanak, the Midrash, is spoken truly. The kingdoms of Babylon, Greece, Media, and Edom ruled over the Hebrews. The first three gave over to the other kingdoms, but not the third. So it is in fact true. The theological point they're driving from the text is true. Now, the question that we are chasing after and the answer that we are looking for now is the Midrash saying what the simple meaning or even the intention of the verse is? No, it is not. I'd ask again. Is the Midrash telling us what the simple meaning of the verse really is? No, it is not. It's not giving us what the simple meaning is. It's not even giving us the intention of the verse. What is the simple meaning of the verse? The simple meaning is only that certain things are forbidden because of certain reasons. These verses are neither prophecy nor descriptions of what will happen at a later time. So if someone would come to you and say, the rabbis hold that these verses are messianic, what should be your answer to them? Of course not. That is absurd. So a midrash, as we've seen, while relating something which is true, is not a literal interpretation and is not meant to be. Number two, a midrash doesn't usually explain a whole passage, but various verses in a passage, and sometimes only one verse. Number three, there is a method to Midrash, even when it is not literal. In Sotah 14:8, Isaiah 53 is interpreted as referring to Moshe. Now, this makes no sense. Why? Clearly, read it for yourself. Clearly, Isaiah, when he was prophesying, was talking of someone in the future and not Moshe, who is dead and gone. So the question is, what lessons are the rabbis trying to teach by relating Moshe to this chapter, Isaiah 53? And why specifically to this chapter? We all know that Moshe was the greatest of the prophets and was also known as the servant of God. Sotah 14a is showing us that many of the great qualities that Moshe had are likewise there in the servant, which is actually Israel. So, for example, where the servant of Isaiah prays for sinners, so Moshe prayed for those who were guilty of the sin of the golden calf and effected the atonement. By so doing, the Midrash allows us to look at the greatness of Moshe and his work. You see what they're doing is Midrash. Isaiah 53 is not Moshe, but they are saying it's Moshe because they see some similarities. In a similar vein, Rabbi Sadia Gowan explained Isaiah 53, explained it to mean the prophet Jeremiah. And one of the explanations of Abarbanel is that it refers to Josiah. Are they saying this is really them? Or these are midrashic interpretations? They are saying this because in Midrash, many times, verses that deal with categories of people are used to apply to individuals. In the case of Sotah 14:8 on the screen, we see that Isaiah 53 is applied to Moshe. So any individual of exceptional personality could be compared to some of the verses there, that is Isaiah 53, with valid results. This is the reason for the interpretation in Sotah 14a that it is Moshe. This is the reason why the Sadia Goan says it's Jeremiah. The reason why Abarbanel says it's Josiah. See, that there are obvious reasons as to why they do not apply literally does not take away from the insight that they do in some way relate to parts of it. The obvious reason is Isaiah is prophesying to the future and Moshe is already dead. We know that. So he's not telling us that Isaiah 53, the Messiah there, or the suffering servant there, is Moshe. Not saying that. Or Josiah. They are not saying that. When we see similarities between the life situation of a biblical character and another person, the verses that this character used or that refer to this person can be applied to the other person who is in the same situation. We see this clearly with Esther, who was in a similar position as David in Psalms 44. Is it Psalms 44 or Psalms 22? I'd have to check. Check me on this one. What do we see there? Anyone reading the Psalms is struck by David's expression of his emotions about these difficulties and his unwavering faith that God would always stand by him. His depression in feeling abandoned, we see that. His strong faith and calls to praise God, we see that. His enemies surrounding him, we see that. Now, the rabbis of the Midrash see reflected here the same emotions that Esther felt when faced with the destruction of her people. Even though she was queen, she felt surrounded by those who would kill her. Her fear and depression as she stands in the hallway waiting to see if the king will extend his staff and accept her, and if not, kill her. And we see her strong faith in God, just like David. So by the rabbis associating this with Esther, they are showing that the Psalms have a universal aspect that applies to many people in many situations. One of these being Esther. By the same logic, the Messiah is many times compared to David. I'll give you another Midrash in closing. In Bamidbar Rabbah 36:4, Rabbi Brachai said, Heaven and earth were not created except in the merit of Israel. As it says, Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, which is, well, Bereshit is supposed to be in the beginning of, strictly. But in Bamidbar Rabbah, after he says heaven and earth were not created except in the merit of Israel, as it says, in the beginning, that is Bereshit, God created. What is he talking about? Focus on this Reshis here. Reshis. The rabbi goes on to say, the word Reshis only means Israel. Reshis, he says, means Israel. As it says in Jeremiah 2:2, he quotes it. Israel is holy to the Lord, the first of his fruits or grain. Now, the word used for first here in Jeremiah 2:2 is Reshis. So if the Hebrew people are Yah's first fruit, then the rabbi is saying, in the beginning, Bereshis, for the sake of Israel, God created the heavens and the earth. Israel is holy to God, his first fruit. Reshis. Bereshis bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. For the sake of the Hebrew people, God created the heavens and the earth. This is how the rabbi is reading this. Because Reshis in this context, in his Midrash, means Israel. So the point of this Midrash is that since the world was created for the Torah and the people who keep it, which is Israel, it means that the whole creation can be said as having been for those who follow the Torah, that is Israel. Is this what Genesis 1:1 is teaching? No. But this is the Midrashic interpretation taken from it, not literal. This is the Midrashic interpretation taken for it, because Reshiz in Jeremiah 2 means fast. Again, a Midrash, while relating something which is true, is not a literal interpretation and is not meant to be. A Midrash doesn't usually explain a whole passage, but various verses in a passage, and sometimes only one verse. Number 3, there is a method to Midrash even when it is not literal. So when we come to Isaiah 52, Targum Jonathan, verses 13, which states, "Behold, my servant Messiah shall prosper. He shall be high and increase and be exceedingly strong." We should remember what we said. The Targum is a Midrashic commentary and not a literal one. Now we can ask our 2 questions. Is the theological point Targum Jonathan making in Isaiah 52:13 true? And number 2, is it telling us what the simple meaning of the verse really is? The answer to number 1 is yes. Messiah shall prosper is the theological point that Targum Jonathan is making on Isaiah 52:13. Behold, my servant Messiah is a theological point. Is it true that Messiah shall prosper, that Messiah shall be lifted high, increase, and strong? Yes, it is true. The theological point is true. Now, the main question is Targum Jonathan on Isaiah 52:13, is it telling us what the simple meaning of the verse really is in the Tanak? No. The Targum subscribes to the view that Israel is the suffering servant. You should know which game the Midrash is playing. Don't interpret it, or don't miss it, or don't confuse it for the simple meaning of the text.